Welcome back, South Philly Sauce and Audacy Original, brought to you by 94 WIP and Jack Daniels. Ashlyn, Sullivan, Al Morganti back here with you. The Flyers with two big back-to-back wins off their Four Nations break, two really impressive wins. And the biggest thing, Al, is this offensive surge that we're all of a sudden seeing. We saw 6 goals against the Penguins, and really just as a whole, and the most encouraging thing is it's coming from all different lines as well.
Yeah, Ashlyn, it's just great to get goals. If you're a fan, to go to the building and actually be able to stand up and cheer for goals. I mean, went through months, it seemed like, where 1 goal a game, 2 goals a game. Then you got 12 goals in 2 games, and the building was full against Edmonton, and they managed to get 6 goals, and that Michkov line with Couturier was just terrific. Followed up with Pittsburgh and goals again. This time the Brink line with everybody just chipping in there. Cates had a monster game. Forster played terrific. So, I mean, although, they say championships are won with defense, whatever, you have to have the good goaltending. Defense has to play well. If you're just a fan coming to the building, boy, you just want to get up and just howl when your team scores a goal. And this was terrific. And I mean, players feed off it. Let's face it. It's a great thing. It's a great feeling to score a goal. The celebrations that follow. So I think I guess you couldn't have scripted this any better. To go into a break like they had, and to come back and to have the 2 teams on the schedule, like Edmonton with McDavid coming in, and then Crosby with the Penguins, and just light them up.
Yeah, it was really impressive, especially when you look at the back-to-back games for the Flyers. And as a whole, I think the biggest thing we're seeing is the impact that they're back healthy, right? Like, we knew the injuries were brutal going into the Four Nations, and you only hoped if you could get this team back healthy, you'd see some impact. And now if they can keep this going where because frankly, with all these teams fighting for the wild cards, it's going to come down to timing. It's going to come down to health and taking it game by game. If the Flyers can do all those 3 things, they got a shot here.
Yeah, the health is, the break it really did, like an all-star break or whatever, just a little bit of time to get healthy. It's like, you just look for that break to just heal a little bit, because, there isn't much load management in the NHL. No. Basically, if you can crawl out of the bed, you're you're healthy and you're a productive player. You're in the lineup. You're going to play. And you're going to take a beating. And I think that as much as people wanted to go to the tournament, and the tournament was terrific, and guys got beat up there, those that didn't go, I think they really benefited from it. None more than Michkov, who just looks like a different play, just another level of energy. That's why I think this response after the break should be a pretty clear indication of what he's going to have to do this summer to train for an NHL season, to get ready like that. It's far different with the grind that the NHL has compared to playing maybe on the weekends or once a week in another league. This is a whole different grind physically and mentally. And I think you see that coming back from this break. Now the problem is going to be, or the challenge is going to be, to kind of maintain that going forward.
Right, absolutely. And it's very similar to last year, where you have to give it 100% every single game to have a chance. And it's a lot to ask with still over 20 games remaining, but they're in it. And that should be motivation in itself. But, we drive into the Wells Fargo yesterday, the Pittsburgh Penguins, the Flyers, they're all over the video boards. It's that matchup that everyone talks about, and it's marketed. It's like, oh, it's going to be this awesome game. And I think the biggest takeaway we had, at least on post game, while it was great the Flyers played so well, was how terrible the Penguins looked. Like, it was hard to get excited for that game because it didn't even seem like a close matchup, which is crazy when you look at the standings, because the Penguins were right below the Flyers. The Flyers looked like they should have been 8 teams above the Penguins.
Yeah, because when you did it, as you mentioned, you looked at the standings, and if a team loses these 2 games, now the Flyers taking the first half of it in the back-to-back, you're really done. I mean, you're just done. So, I mean, the Flyers can bury the Penguins in Pittsburgh on Thursday night. But you're right, what the Penguins showed up with was remarkably bad. And the lack of push they had, the lack of physicality that they had. They didn't even notice, Crosby coming back from the Four Nations. He wasn't a factor in the game. Nobody was a factor in the game. The goaltending was soft. The defense was god-awful. But you have to take advantage of it. And I think they realized early they couldn't keep up with the Flyers. The Flyers are just flying. And they just, in hockey, no matter how lopsided it might seem, you can have a physical response to things to kind of just stop it. And they had none of that. They just looked disinterested in this game. It was alarming to see. I mean, from a Flyers fan perspective, you get to celebrate that, but it's kind of like if the Eagles just bully the Cowboys. It's fun, but it becomes more fun when it's a real rivalry and you beat them. But since they've had Crosby, we'll take this certainly. But it was a far different game than a lot of people expected. And I actually think I got to think that the Penguins were embarrassed by it because, when we do a post game, we don't usually, you want to pump up the Flyers for what they did. You want to pump up the positive, right? But my God, it was so glaring on what was going on the other side. It's like, what the heck is up with that? That's just, that's not acceptable at any level to come up with that sort of performance. So you take it, and I assume now what they're going to find, I presume, I can't imagine that Pittsburgh doesn't have some sort of response the next in Pittsburgh when the Flyers go in there and try to get this thing cranked up again.
Yeah, you got to think they're going to get their best, but we said it before these two games, the home and home series, if you're able to sweep, the one who does sweep is in a great position and the one who isn't is basically dead on the season. It's like, if that's not motivation enough for the Penguins, I don't know what is.
Yeah, but I think because the Penguins have, they're core players, they're Hall of Famers, if you will. I think that they've been there, won the cups, and won all the awards, and certainly they're going to end up in the Hall of Fame, some of them. And I think when you have that sense as that kind of player that we don't really have a chance to win this whole thing, I think sometimes then it does get difficult to kind of crank it up late in a season to kind of, because honestly, what are we doing? We can't win a Stanley Cup. We're probably not going to make the playoffs. I've made my career already. I've already had all the accolades here. That's why you need young players to kind of push the bus at that point. And I don't know that they have any of that right there. They're in a real tough spot with what they have here. It's ironic that you look at them and what they tried to do and being unable to do it. Then you look to Washington, who looked like they were going to be in that spot and simply play the next 2 years so Ovechkin could break Gretzky's record. Meanwhile, the team would go nowhere. And what happened is everything they did turned to gold in terms of trades and people they brought in. That's exactly what hasn't happened in Pittsburgh. But, no sympathy for them, for everything that's happened in the past few years, for all their successes. The Flyers will dance on their grave very, very willingly for as long as they can.
Yeah, and you're definitely seeing that. We'll see what happens with this next Pittsburgh game. But the Flyers are rolling right now. And you got to think if they keep playing this way, they can win 3 in a row, which would make them really feel good about their chances. But that's all probably going to depend on Sam Ersson, who has been so solid. And it was interesting. John Tortorella was asked about this at Morning Skate the other day about what he would do differently. The Flyers are somewhat in the conversation, but they were very much more so in a playoff spot at this point last season. And this was at the point where Sam Ersson was just getting worked into the ground because they had no other choice. I think you really saw the effects of it, especially late March, early April. They're going to have to do the same thing, but Torts did say he's going to manage it much better this season.
Yeah, Ashlyn, he's going to manage it better, and I think Ersson is too. I think last year he was he wasn't. Last year was like, how did this happen or whatever? Yeah, and it was they kind of let it slip through their hands last year. This year, Ersson looks, much as it was nice to talk about the goals, he made some big saves early, and you just got a sense. I just think you can tell around a team when there's just trust in a goaltender now. It's like last year there was still questions. Can he do this and what's going to happen? But now I think there'd be surprise if he doesn't have a strong game, if he doesn't have a solid game. That's who you are with him. He's not elite level, at least not yet. But you expect a really solid performance, and you really have confidence. You play a different way in front of a goaltender. You don't expect there's going to be that meltdown. Again, the Pittsburgh, Nedeljkovic, their goaltender, was just god awful, and you see what happens in front when you have to make up for that. So Ersson's been a real good story for this team, and I actually think, much as I wanted him to get the rest, and I think he might have been able to use that rest, that confidence he got in that Four Nations being included, I think really was a big boost for him. And although, to beat that Team USA in a game that, quote, meant nothing, I don't think it meant nothing to the Swedes. And I think he played strong in that and then came back. And I don't know how many games he's going to play down the stretch here, but I would be surprised if it's not like, if they're in this race, if he doesn't get the call at 90% of the time.
Yeah, he's going to have to be. I mean, that gives them their best chance to win, and that's why it's so crucial right now. We talked a lot to the guys this week about how they still feel like there's a possibility that the playoffs are somewhat realistic for this team. And at first I was like, and then you look at the standings and you're like, actually, they're kind of right. I mean, if they go on a run here, but the key is a run. It can't be what we've seen all season where it's win one, lose two, win one, lose two, and it's this back and forth. Like, you got to stack regulation wins right now, which, to their credit, they've done 2 in a row now.
Yeah, you got to do the regulation wins against teams in your division, conference especially. So that's why these next games, I mean, you're at Pittsburgh, and then, Winnipeg's just a monster. But after those, I believe it's a 7-game stretch of home games.
There is.
Now, it might be against good teams, but they just got a dozen goals and 2 goals at home. They had a sellout crowd against Edmonton. They really might be able to feed off that. To me, that stretch is the only way they get in a playoff spot. Much as you look at that last couple of wins, well, teams ahead of them got points. Columbus, even Boston losing a game gets a point going into overtime. The Rangers sort of had a bounce back. So to me, that stretch of games there, where you've got 14 available points, you better get at least 10 of them, I would think, to be able to stay in it. It's a great opportunity, but it's a huge ask to be in the playoff contention because of the way the 1 point for the going into overtime. If you lose a game, that's the teams in front of them they have to worry about. So I mean, it's an enormous ask, but you can't let it slip here. It certainly would be nice to bury the Penguins, get them out of the picture totally, and then Winnipeg is a monster. But more important than that, it's okay. Let's get back to Philadelphia. Let's look at these games in front of us, and you know what? This is our opportunity. If we're going to do it, if we're going to climb the mountain, this is going to be our base camp right here.
Yeah, it's got to be the division. It's got to be the conference, and they have a great opportunity. And I think especially you mentioned the 7-game homestand. It's a little interesting. You have a 7-game homestand, and then you really end the season on the road for a multitude of games. You're going to be in this playoff push. But we talked about over the weekend, it was a real surprise to me, the Flyers, and multiple people with the Flyers told me this, that they were advertising it, that it was the first sellout in 5 games on Saturday. And I was like, no way. Like, the building's been packed the past 2 years. Like, there's no way that was the first sellout. But they said it was the first sellout in 5 seasons, and you get to watch the Flyers shut down Connor McDavid. So that was awesome. Building was packed for Pittsburgh, last night. It was interesting. I thought they would have more sellouts, but that's what you're trying to get to at this point.
Yeah, gone are the days when you just automatic sellouts, and you think Pittsburgh coming in so often, but it's been Philadelphia has been a saturated market for sports. With obviously the Eagles, the Phillies going on a run. There's only so much money to go around, and until very recently, the Sixers were considered contenders, whatever, and the Flyers were in this quote rebuild. But I think as important as it is organizationally, I really think individually, I don't know if you saw the same thing I saw, but this Michkov, he feeds off that. To me, there are certain players who have full house and high expectations, and the roar of the crowd get them cranked more than others. And I can just tell, I've seen it enough. I can just tell this Michkov, if there's a full house and energy, this kid's ready to put on a show. And I think the better they get, the more entertaining they get, the more the crowd buys in, the better he's going to be.
Agreed. And I think he's made for moments like this. And what an experience it would be to be in a playoff push your first year, your rookie year. I think when George talks about his really good lessons for the young guys, it would be even more so for him.
Yeah, and to say nothing, I mean, individual awards, but if he goes on this pace, he really does have a chance to be a rookie of the year, to keep playing like this. I mean, if they make this final push and his numbers keep getting pumped up, he's got a shot at it. And I don't think he's a secret. It certainly wasn't a secret coming in with all the stories around him. But now it's like, oh, this kid's for real, because some of those passes were just spectacular.
Yeah, good stuff from the Flyers. So far, heading into a new month, the month of March, and that's South Philly Sauce and the Audacy Original, brought to you by 94 WAP. And Jack Daniels will be back early next week to recap some more games. It is certainly crunch time for the Flyers. Thanks so much for tuning in.